Good morning, and welcome to a State of the District Roundtable discussion hosted by Representative Melanie Morgan. Viewers are encouraged to ask questions about the topics raised during this event, so if you have a question, please ask it in the chat. Representative Morgan has asked community leaders and state lawmakers to join her to share highlights from the 2021 legislative session, including local projects, statewide laws on police reform, homelessness, and climate change. Representative Morgan is a former school board director, a U.S. Army veteran, and currently serves as the Deputy Majority Floor Leader and the chair of the Members of Color Caucus in the House of Representatives. Representative Morgan, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Travis, and welcome everybody from the 29th Legislative District. I'm so happy to be with all of you this morning. It's been a great session. As usual, there's a lot of work to be done, but I just wanted to share with you to begin with, how did this all play out as that we weren't meeting in person? And I will say for our district, this worked very, very well, especially in terms of civic engagement. The House of Representatives, the staff were already working on remote session in 2020 in piloting that. And how perfect that we went ahead and did that, because who knew it was going to be a pandemic? But I tell you what, it worked out very nicely. More people were engaged in terms of transportation, that we have inadequate transportation here in our district. So it allowed a lot more people to be able to testify in committee hearings, and it allowed more people to be engaged, even if there's not a lot of people who like to speak in public. So coming on virtually also gave that kind of security in being able to share your voice with us in the state legislature. And for that, I am really, really proud. We established certain criteria to make sure that our work got through and it didn't overwhelm our staff, but that we all worked together. And we'll be talking about that later on in the program. In terms of, we established buckets, we established a limited number of bills. So that allowed us to really focus on what was really important to the state of Washington, especially in a time of crises. So I am so happy today that I'm being joined by my colleagues, Representative Johnson, Representative Shoemake, and my colleague Sharon Lee with the Low Income Housing Institute. I think you're going to be really excited with our program that we have today. And I think you're going to be excited that I brought home over $11 million back to our district to help us with our resources. And we're going to talk about that soon. So Travis, I'm going to turn this back over to you, and let's start with the first question.
Great. We do have some questions that were sent in, and I know that there was a couple that came through via your email. People asked like what really was different, since a lot of lawmakers were working from their home. People didn't really know what virtual session meant. You've already talked about how great it was that more people got to participate, which is definitely true when you look at the numbers. But what was it like for you for the virtual session, not being there in the Capitol, especially since you have these leadership roles?
Right. And that took a lot of pivoting as well. And that's what a good leader does, right? We don't allow any crises to move us from the mission at hand. And I am most proud. I would not have been able to do this by myself. I had to have staff support, my colleague support. And so I think the most proudest moment of the session for me as a Deputy Majority Floor Leader was I got to run the floor for 2.5 days. That's getting through 40 bills. And that proved to be very experiential for me. And it's a lot of work. And I have to give hats off to Madam Floor Leader Stonier for always pulling that off. But stepping into that role in this virtual session could have been a little bit of a challenge, but it's about building relationships to begin with my colleagues, so that when I'm setting up a speaking schedule, I already know what their talents are. I already know where their passions are. So it really helped to get our speakers to the floor. In juggling all of those roles, also as the MOCC chair, a member of Color Caucus chair, ensuring that our legislative priorities made it through as well. So I worked In a lot of areas, I think it was easier because I didn't have to do a lot of walking from building to building. I sat right here and just maneuvered around. And I tell you what, it sure was reminiscent of my military days in terms of sending messages when we didn't even have internet. So I think I was already prepped to do the work, and I believe that it was very successful. As we saw, if you go back and watch TVW on those days at moving those bills forward and ensuring that all of our members were on the floor and fighting and debating for you, the constituent, and ensuring that we brought back the resources and the legislation that was needed. My day-to-day work was not affected. I still met with stakeholders. We jumped from 15 minutes to 15 minutes right here. Leslie, my LA, was very instrumental in making sure that that was smooth and transitioned well. I met with constituents as well in this space. So I don't think that we really experienced much of a loss in terms of being in a physical environment or a virtual environment. I think the dedication of my caucus ensured that we ensured that the constituents at most were able to engage, and I think that was achieved.
Great, thank you. We also had, we talked a little bit about how you handled that day to day work and juggled those roles. And I think that a lot of people had questions about what all got done, particularly when it came to the state budget. A lot of the questions that we've seen come from folks who ask, like, what's in the state budget that they're actually going to experience or that they're going to actually see. Would you like to speak to the various budgets that passed and what constituents can expect? I know you kind of hinted there that there was some money that came in. So,
Right. First of all, I start with overall that the first thing that we addressed when we got into session is our early action bills, and that was about the money and taking care of for rental assistance and taking care of for COVID in any of those and small businesses, making sure that we were bringing all of our people along and trying to ensure that nobody was falling through the cracks. And that's why we addressed that as the first priority of when we got in session. And then throughout the session, working with our stakeholders and our community members, ensuring that exactly what they were missing, that is what we had worked on. And as I have stipulated, bringing money back to the district is what's important. As you could see in my first term, I was just learning, brought home the 1.5 million for our community center, which we'll be talking about later. But also Sharon Lee from the Low Income Housing Institute is here because we are going to be putting a homeless shelter here in Spanaway. And that we got $1 million to begin that process. Also, in terms of agriculture was another area that I really pushed for equity, because the reality is in the south part of our district, we still have rural areas that need to be preserved, as we've seen that a lot of development has come through. So I really wanted the Department of Agriculture to create a whole new position and looking at the equity inside agriculture and how does that affect our district. There are other monies brought in for the cannabis industry in the task force that I co-chair. So we also have brought that forward in terms of money. For us here, we're still working on the transportation, and that's the most exciting piece. That was at the last minute with Chair Fye from the 27th called me and said, are you ready to move forward with the study on our area? We all have experienced that it takes forever to get out of Parkland and Spanaway. And how I've been selling that, it's a public health hazard. If any natural disaster comes here, we're stuck. To me, it equals death. So we have got a study now. That was another $1 million put into the budget to look at another route to I-5 from our area. So I'm really excited about that. Let me see, what else did we get here? Of course, Juneteenth, that costs money. It's a state holiday for all of us to recognize of chattel slavery and the atrocity that that caused, and really to talk about the reconciliation of all of our people together in the state of Washington, but recognizing Black African Americans. And we knew that was 7.5 million. We could not do it in 2020, but we did do it in 2021. And most people may have pushed back, and why are we spending money on that? The reality is it's not an either or, it's all of the above. And as we're going to hear from Representative Johnson later on police accountability, you will see that we also ensured that all of that was put into the budget. So rental assistance, food assistance, transportation, healthcare, those are the things that affect our district that we need. We have a long way to go, but it was a great beginning.
Great. So we do have a few questions that have been sent in, and I think some might be more appropriate for later when we have some of our guests on, but we do have a few folks here who have some questions about some of the local issues, but then also just general issues. And one is we had a constituent who wrote in concerned about voter suppression. Mm-hmm. They asked, are there any voter suppression bills in the state legislature this year, and what are they? And I think that they were concerned about, did any pass, or is that something that we have to worry about here in Washington State?
I don't think we have to worry about voter suppression here in Washington State. Not the way that we have been electing representation to serve all of us. I don't think that's going to be possible. There was an attempt to bring voter suppression bills forward, but those did not get through, and we're excited about that. But let's focus on the positive. With Representative Simmons getting her bill passed on people now who have had felonies to be able to vote now and re-register in those areas. So I think that we move forward in making sure that we have more voters in terms of decreasing our voter turnout. We know here in the 29th legislative district that we were, because we don't know now, we don't have the data yet, we're a low voting district. My hope is that all of the work that all of us have been doing in terms of around elections, that we have raised that voter turnout. And I know for sure in the last election that did happen, because when I looked at the data, the pre-data that we had raised in all of our precincts 20%, which I am ecstatic about. That means that more people are getting engaged, and that means that more people are participating, and that means that everyone out there who is in this process, who's doing get out the vote, who's a precinct officer, pat yourselves on the back, because that reflects on you that you did your job. So job well done.
Thank you. And I'm going to go ahead and admit Representative Shoemake, who has just joined us. And there's Representative Shoemake. So we'll go ahead and if it's all right, we'll maybe take one more question, and then we can move on to our panelists. And we'll hear from Representative Shoemake along with Representative Johnson and Sharon Lee. So the next question that we had was actually in regards to what the legislature did this year in terms of helping those families who are struggling with rent, for those businesses that are struggling, people who are losing their homes and their jobs. The question was, we hear a lot about tax increases. Was there any tax relief this year?
Those are some good questions. And, as I ride around the district, it's very disheartening to see all the businesses that had to close down because of the pandemic. They might have been struggling to begin with, but this really just really pushed them out. And that is very sad. Businesses that have been here since I moved to the state of Washington 28 years ago. So I am really ecstatic about that. We ensured that we were taking care of small businesses. If you remember, before we even got into the session, that I held Morgan Mondays, and we brought on the Urban League talking about small businesses and ensuring that they had resources. And so I think that we took off from that point and moved it further in making sure that we gave money back to those programs for people, for small businesses that were struggling. Also, we gave some exemptions to people who are paying the B&O tax and property tax and unemployment insurance tax cut so that businesses can recover. It's going to be a hard climb back, especially for our district. We know that our district struggles the most in terms of we have a lot more small mom and pop shops. And so therefore we don't have a big CEO bucket to go in and get money from. And that's why we ensured that we took care of those people by making sure there's money there. So I encourage anyone with a small business to reach out to those entities, go to ledge.wa.gov and find out how you can get money, grants, or whatever it is that you need to ensure that you stay afloat during this time. I support you. You call my office if you're having trouble finding that. But I do believe that we were emphatically making sure that we're taking care of our families, like passing the working families tax exemption, which puts money back into the pockets of our working families. We also made sure that we applied rental assistance inside that budget so that we could pay back the accrued rents that weren't paid. Also, the one I'm really excited about is that we put money into people who are owning homes, because we know that the way to building wealth is through home ownership. So we don't want anyone to lose their homes in foreclosures. So we made sure that we put some assistance there as well. It's a large packet. It's very detailed and intricate. I would suggest that you take a look through there in terms of what it is that you need for yourself. But there's also other nonprofit agencies more in Tacoma, like the Urban League, that can help you vet those resources out as well.
Great, thank you so much. Well, we do have more questions, but if we have time, we'll come back to those. What I'd love to do now is have all of our panelists join us. We have Representative Sharon Shoemake, we also have Sharon Lee, and we also have Representative Jesse Johnson. So if folks want to throw on their cameras there, and we'll get some graphics up. And I know that we have some great topics. I know Representative Shoemake, you're here to talk to us a little bit about some of the work we've done on climate change and environment legislation. So why don't we turn it over to Representative Shoemake, who can start us off, and then if we have questions, we'll load those up.
Yeah, thank you. And Rep. Morgan, this is such a cool idea of having other people come onto your town hall and let people see that we really work together, that it's not just one person doing all of this, but it's such a team effort. And I love having such an incredible team that we have in the House Democratic Caucus. I've learned so much from y'all. So I am here to talk about the environmental legislation we did. And there's a lot of climate work we did, but I also want to talk about some of the other stuff we did too. So one of them is Senate Bill 5022, which works on recycling, and it really closes the loop we had. You might have heard a few years ago about how China made some decisions about no longer accepting our recycled goods. One of the problems with plastic recycling is that it just doesn't pencil out. There's not a market for your leftover orange juice containers and milk jugs, right? And so one of the ways that we can fix this problem is we can create a market. And we do that by requiring, if you're going to make the next generation of plastic bags or orange juice jugs, you have to use a minimum recycled content. And so this is what we heard from industry that was needed, and that's what we required. We also banned those little packing peanuts made when they're made out of styrofoam. I've never heard someone open up a box and be like, oh, yay, packing peanuts that are going to fill up my garbage can. Never, ever, ever has that happened. And so we're getting rid of those, and then as well as single-use takeout when they're made out of styrofoam. I think that's all going to be kind of some of these movements towards a more sustainable closed loop system when it comes to takeout that we've seen a big increase in. And then also we're requiring that if you go and you get some burgers, people ask before they give you a whole bunch of ketchup packets, utensils, straws, etc., right? And so maybe you do need those, and that's fine, and you should be able to eat your food. But I know sometimes I go pick up burgers for my family, I'm going to bring them home, and that's just an extra pile of garbage that wasn't necessary. So we should be a little conscientious about this. Another piece of legislation we did is the HEAL Act. And what this is doing is it's addressing environmental justice. And if you haven't heard of environmental justice, that is the finding that communities of color are disproportionately burdened by air, water, and land pollution. And this is a really big deal because the more we learn about air pollution, the greater the health impacts are. We're talking about premature babies, we're talking about asthma, we're talking about really long-term health impacts. And what we're doing here is we are embedding environmental justice in every point of the agencies that make decisions that influence it, right? So we're looking at Commerce, the Department of Commerce, the Department of Agriculture, the Department of Transportation, the Department of Natural Resources, a few other that I'm not going to remember. But the idea being that they need to have plans. They need to have this be part of their upfront thinking when they're deciding where to put the next highway or where to do a remediation project. They need to have community input and they need to hold themselves accountable. So I think that's all really important, good work, and it's kind of creating this process for better environmental justice outcomes. So we passed a few climate bills, but the two I want to talk to you today are the Low Carbon Fuel Standard and our Cap and Invest Act. So the Low Carbon Fuel Standard is trying to get at our the carbon emissions that come from our transportation system. So if you're driving from point A to point B, you're probably using gasoline in your car, or maybe you're using diesel. And so diesel creates some of that local air quality that really impacts our lungs. It can make your eyes burn. It's not good stuff to breathe. And so we'd like to reduce that. And one of the options is that now refineries, when they sell diesel, they also have to sell some greener fuels. And so those greener fuels can be biodiesel, it can be hydrogen, it can be paying into a fund that gets more electric cars on the road. And so what we're trying to do is directly replace some of the polluting fuels that are used in our transportation system. The other piece is a more economy-wide carbon policy, and that is the Cap and Invest. And what it does is it says, okay, we have a goal for greenhouse gas emissions, right? Right now, anyone can produce as much as they want. We want to reduce that, and we want to be consistent with the Paris goals of keeping global warming below 2 degrees Celsius. And that's a big deal, and that's a hard thing to achieve. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, well, this is the amount of pollution we want. Some of it is given out in allowances for free to various industries because we don't want them picking up and leaving out of Washington where they'll probably be able to pollute more and we'll lose those jobs as well. And so we're really careful and mindful of that impact. The rest is if you want it to be able to emit a ton of carbon, you need a carbon credit for that. And that helps us keep accountable, right? That means that we're now realizing that maybe the space in the atmosphere to absorb CO2, if we want to avoid the bad impacts of climate change, is limited. And we're going to try and limit that in a market-based method. My background is an environmental economist, and this is what I've spent my life studying, and this is the most cost-effective way to address climate change. And I think that cost effectiveness is really important because CO2 is something that's just pervasive in so many of the activities that we do. And you really want to make sure that, we want to preserve life on Earth and reduce the impacts of climate change. They're really scary. But we want to do so cost effectively so that other places copy us, but also make sure that we're not spending more money than we need to, that we're really holding ourselves accountable and we have a policy that works. So those are the two big climate pieces. There's a few other things we did in the budget too. I would say that salmon recovery and orca recovery are other big environmental priorities right now. And a lot of that was done in conservation work. So we spent a lot of money on salmon. In some ways are really a forest species. And